Dora the credit card incident. A personal account. The morning started like any other Tuesday in my downtown Chicago apartment. Rain drummed against the windows of my 32nd floor unit, creating that familiar urban symphony that had become the soundtrack to my daily routine. I was sitting at my kitchen island, laptop open, steam rising from my coffee mug, conducting what had become a sacred ritual in my carefully orchestrated life. Reviewing my monthly financial statements. I had always been meticulous about money. Growing up in a middle-class family in suburban Oak Park, I watched my parents struggle through the 2008 recession, saw how quickly financial security could evaporate when you weren't paying attention. That experience had shaped me into someone who tracked every expense, who understood the weight of each dollar earned and spent. My small consulting business, Harper & Associates, had taken 3 years to build from the ground up, and every transaction mattered. The credit card statement loaded on my screen, and I began my usual methodical review. Groceries from Whole Foods, gas from the Shell station on Michigan Avenue, my monthly subscription to the co-working space in River North. Everything made sense. Everything had its place in the carefully maintained ecosystem of my financial life. Then I saw it. $4,700. American Airlines. March 15th. Yesterday. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold in my hand. The number seemed to pulse with an otherworldly presence, defying logic and explanation. I hadn't booked any flights. I hadn't even been to an airport in months. My last trip had been a quick business meeting in Milwaukee, and I had driven. My first instinct was to assume it was a mistake, some glitch in the system that would resolve itself with a simple phone call to customer service. But something deeper, more primitive, was stirring in my chest. A cold recognition that this wasn't about systems or technology. This was about people, about trust, about the invisible threads that connect us to those we love most. I scrolled through my phone contacts until I found home. My parents' landline in the house where I had grown up, where family dinners still happened every Sunday, where my mother still kept my high school track medals displayed on the mantel. The phone rang 3 times before my mother's voice, warm and familiar, answered. "Sarah." "Honey, what's wrong? You sound stressed." "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did anyone in the family use my credit card? There's a charge here for almost $5,000 to American Airlines." The silence that followed was not the silence of confusion or surprise. It was the silence of recognition, of someone who knew exactly what I was talking about but was calculating how to respond. In that pause, I felt the first crack in the foundation of trust that I had built my understanding of my family upon. "Sarah, sweetheart, let me talk to your father about this. Can you give me a few minutes?" "Mom, did someone use my card or not? I'll call you back in a few minutes, okay? Just don't do anything hasty." The line went dead, and I was left staring at my phone screen, my reflection distorted in the black surface. "Don't do anything hasty." The phrase echoed in my mind as I paced around my apartment, rain still beating against the windows, the city below continuing its relentless pace, while my world began to shift on its axis. I made another cup of coffee, my hands shaking slightly as I measured out the grounds. The routine was comforting, familiar, but it couldn't quiet the growing storm in my chest. I had given my credit card information to my parents years ago for emergencies, back when I was still in graduate school and they occasionally needed to help with unexpected expenses. But that was different. That was survival. This was something else entirely. My phone buzzed. A notification from Instagram. My sister Emma had posted a new story. I opened it without thinking, the same mindless reflex that had guided me through countless social media interactions. But this time, the image that appeared on my screen felt like a physical blow. Emma, radiant and glowing, sitting in what was unmistakably a first-class airline seat. The champagne glass in her hand caught the light streaming through the airplane window. The caption read, "First class to Paris, baby. Dreams do come true. Living my best life, Srar and Paris. First class. Blessed." I stared at the image for a long moment, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. The timeline aligned perfectly. The charge on my card, the expensive ticket, the destination that Emma had been talking about, wanting to visit for years but could never afford, on her retail manager's salary. My sister had stolen from me. Not borrowed, not asked, stolen. The realization hit me like a physical force, and I found myself sitting heavily on my couch, phone still in my hand, the image of Emma's joyful face mocking me from the screen. We had always been close, despite the 4-year age gap. She was the dreamer in the family, full of grand plans and artistic aspirations, while I was the practical one, the one who made lists and followed through on commitments. I had always supported her dreams, had even helped her financially when she was between jobs last year. But she had never asked for this, never mentioned Paris, never indicated that she felt entitled to simply take what she needed from my bank account. In those first moments of understanding, I felt the familiar analytical mechanisms of my mind engaging. This wasn't just about money. This was about power dynamics, about respect, about the unspoken contracts that exist between family members. Emma's decision to steal from me represented a fundamental misunderstanding of who I was, what I had worked for, and what she believed she was entitled to take. I called her number, knowing she probably wouldn't answer mid-flight, but needing to try anyway. It went straight to voicemail. Her voice, cheerful and carefree, invited me to leave a message. Instead, I hung up and called my parents again. This time, my father answered. His voice was tense, prepared for battle. "Sarah, before you say anything, you need to understand that this is a family matter. Emma has been going through a rough time, and we thought—" "You thought what, Dad? That you could just use my credit card without asking? That's theft. That's fraud." "It's not fraud when it's family. Your mother and I will pay you back, of course. We just thought you wouldn't mind helping your sister out with something that meant so much to her." The casual way he said it, the assumption that my money was somehow communal property, that my consent was irrelevant, ignited something primal in my chest. I had worked 60-hour weeks to build my business. I had sacrificed social events, relationships, vacations, all to create the financial security that was now being casually redistributed according to my family's definition of fairness. "Dad, that money came from my business account. Emma just spent my rent money. She spent money that was meant for my employees' paychecks. This isn't about being generous. This is about basic respect." "Sarah, you're being dramatic. It's just money. Family is more important than money." Then why didn't anyone think to ask me first? Why didn't anyone think that maybe I deserved to know that my sister was planning to spend $5,000 of my money on a vacation? Because we knew you would say no. You're always so tight with money, so worried about every penny. Emma deserves to have some joy in her life. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, my father's voice growing more defensive, my mother occasionally interjecting with pleas for understanding and family unity. But I had already made my decision. The moment Emma posted that Instagram story, celebrating her theft with champagne and hashtags, she had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. What they didn't understand was that this decision wasn't born from anger, though anger was certainly present. It was born from a deeper understanding of who I was and what I stood for. Throughout my life, I had been the responsible one, the one who cleaned up messes, who provided stability when others created chaos. I had accepted this role because I believed it served a purpose, that my reliability created a foundation upon which others could build their dreams. But Emma's actions had revealed a fundamental flaw in this dynamic. My reliability had been interpreted as weakness, my generosity as obligation. The family had come to see my resources not as the product of my labor, but as a communal fund to be accessed at will. This wasn't about one airplane ticket. This was about the entire architecture of our relationships. I called American Airlines customer service. The automated system guided me through a maze of options until I finally reached a human being, a woman named Jennifer, with a slight southern accent, who listened patiently as I explained my situation. "So, you're saying this charge was unauthorized?" she asked. "Completely unauthorized. I never gave permission for this purchase, and I want to report it as fraud." "I understand, ma'am. I'm going to need to verify some information with you, and then we'll begin the fraud investigation process. Please be aware that this may affect the passenger's travel experience." "I understand." The process took 45 minutes. Jennifer was thorough, professional, and completely unsympathetic to the fact that the fraudulent charge had been made by a family member. In the world of credit card fraud, intent and relationship were irrelevant. What mattered was consent, and I had never given it. "The fraud report has been filed," Jennifer told me. "We'll be placing a hold on the passenger's account, and airport security will be notified. If she's currently traveling, she may experience some disruption in service." "What kind of disruption?" "Well, any premium services associated with the ticket will be suspended pending investigation. Meal service, beverage service, seat upgrades. All of that will be affected until the payment issue is resolved." I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my apartment, rain still pattering against the windows. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. I had protected myself, defended my boundaries, but in doing so, I had declared war on my own family. The decision to report the fraud wasn't impulsive. It was strategic. I understood that this moment would define the trajectory of my relationships with my family for years to come. I could either accept this violation and signal that my boundaries were negotiable, or I could enforce consequences that would be painful but ultimately necessary for the health of our long-term relationships. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Sarah, please reconsider. Emma is already on the plane. Don't ruin this for her." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and began documenting everything. Screenshots of the credit card charge, Emma's Instagram story, the timestamps, the phone conversations. If this was going to become a legal matter, I wanted to be prepared. The methodical process of documentation was therapeutic. Each screenshot, each saved email, each time-stamped note represented a small act of self-advocacy. I was building a case not just for the bank or the airline, but for myself. I was creating a record that would remind me, in moments of doubt, that I had been wronged and that my response was justified. Hours passed. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to Emma, somewhere over the Atlantic, probably wondering why her champagne service had been cut off, why the flight attendants were suddenly treating her with cool professionalism instead of the warm deference that first-class passengers typically received. I imagined her confusion, then her growing realization that something was wrong. I imagined her trying to use the in-flight phone to call home, only to learn that her ticket was under investigation. I imagined her panic as she realized that her triumphant journey to Paris was becoming a nightmare of bureaucratic scrutiny. Part of me felt guilty about these images. Emma was my sister, after all. We had shared a childhood, countless memories, moments of genuine love and support. But another part of me recognized that these consequences were not my creation. They were the natural result of her choices, the inevitable outcome of actions that she had taken without considering their impact on others. The next morning, I woke to 17 missed calls from my mother and a series of increasingly frantic text messages. Emma had been detained at Charles de Gaulle Airport. The payment discrepancy had triggered an alert with French customs, and she was being held for questioning about the suspicious financial activity associated with her ticket. I called my mother back. "Sarah, you have to fix this. Emma is terrified. She's in a foreign country, and they're treating her like a criminal." "She is a criminal, Mom. She stole from me." "She's your sister. She's family. How can you do this to her?" "I didn't do this to her. She did this to herself. She made a choice to steal from me, and now she's facing the consequences of that choice." The French police don't understand that this is a family matter. They think she's involved in some kind of international fraud scheme. Maybe she should have thought about that before she decided to commit international fraud. The conversation ended with my mother hanging up on me, but not before calling me cold, heartless, and a dozen other names that I had never heard her use before. I sat in my kitchen watching the morning sun stream through my windows, feeling like I was living in someone else's life. But even as I absorbed the emotional impact of my mother's words, I recognized the strategic importance of maintaining my position. This wasn't about being cruel or heartless. This was about establishing a precedent that would govern future interactions. If I capitulated now, if I reversed my decision because of emotional pressure, I would be teaching my family that my boundaries were negotiable, that my financial resources were available to anyone who could generate enough emotional leverage to access them. Emma finally called me from the airport 12 hours later. Her voice was small, exhausted, stripped of all the joy and enthusiasm that had characterized her Instagram post. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I've been so depressed lately. And Paris was supposed to be this amazing adventure. And Mom said you wouldn't mind, and I thought... You thought you could steal from me and I wouldn't notice." "I didn't think of it as stealing. I thought of it as borrowing. I was going to pay you back." "With what money, Emma? You're a retail manager. You make $30,000 a year. How exactly were you planning to pay me back $5,000? The silence stretched between us, punctuated by the ambient noise of the airport around her. "I don't know," she whispered finally. "I wasn't thinking clearly." "You were thinking clearly enough to find my credit card information. You were thinking clearly enough to book a first-class ticket. You were thinking clearly enough to post about it on social media. You just weren't thinking clearly enough to consider how this would affect me. What do I do now? You figure out how to get home. And you figure out how to rebuild the trust that you just destroyed." The conversation lasted another 20 minutes. Emma alternated between apologies and justifications, between accepting responsibility and trying to minimize the impact of her actions. I listened with the detached patience of someone who had already made their decision and was simply waiting for the other person to understand the new reality. What struck me most about the conversation was Emma's genuine surprise at the consequences of her actions. She had somehow convinced herself that stealing from me was a victimless crime, that my financial resources were vast enough to absorb the loss without impact. She had failed to consider my business obligations, my personal financial goals, the months of work that had gone into earning that money. This failure of imagination, this inability to consider the full scope of her actions, revealed something fundamental about our relationship. Emma had never really seen me as a complete person with my own needs, goals, and limitations. She had seen me as a resource to be managed, a problem solver to be activated when convenient, a safety net to be relied upon without question. The fraud investigation took 3 days to resolve. During that time, Emma remained in Paris, but her return flight had been cancelled due to the payment dispute. She had to use her own money, what little she had, to book a coach ticket back to Chicago. The contrast between her triumphant departure and her humiliated return was stark, and I found myself feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and guilt. The satisfaction came from seeing justice served, from watching the natural consequences of poor decisions play out without interference. The guilt came from knowing that I had orchestrated these consequences, that I had chosen to enforce them even when I had the power to prevent them. But as I processed these emotions, I recognized that this guilt was misplaced. I had not created Emma's situation. I had simply refused to rescue her from it. There was a crucial difference between causing harm and declining to prevent harm that someone had brought upon themselves. My parents didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. When they finally did, it was through a carefully worded email from my father, explaining that while they didn't agree with my methods, they understood my position. Emma would be paying me back in monthly installments, and they hoped that the family could eventually heal from this incident. The email was a masterpiece of diplomatic language, acknowledging my grievance while maintaining their disagreement with my response. It was clear that they had consulted with others, friends, relatives, perhaps even a lawyer, before crafting their response. The tone suggested that they had been advised to take a conciliatory approach, even if they privately disagreed with my actions. Emma and I didn't speak at all for a month. When we finally did, it was a stilted, awkward conversation in which she apologized again, and I accepted her apology without really forgiving her. The relationship we had built over 28 years had been damaged in a way that would take much longer to repair than the financial harm she had caused. During this period of silence, I found myself reflecting on the nature of family relationships and the role that money plays in them. I had always believed that family bonds were stronger than financial considerations, that love and loyalty could overcome any material disagreement. But Emma's actions had revealed the fragility of these assumptions. The incident had exposed the transactional nature of many family relationships. My parents' anger at my response wasn't really about Emma's suffering in France. It was about their own discomfort with the disruption of family harmony, their own investment in maintaining the fiction that family bonds were unconditional and unbreakable. The bank refunded the charge within a week, as they always do in cases of documented fraud. But the emotional cost was much higher and would take much longer to resolve. I had learned something about my family that I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I had learned that their love came with conditions, that their support was contingent on my willingness to be financially exploited. The refund process itself was surprisingly straightforward. The bank's fraud department was efficient and professional, treating the case as a routine matter of unauthorized charges. They didn't care about the family drama, the emotional complexity, or the long-term relationship consequences. They simply wanted to establish that the charge was unauthorized and process the refund accordingly. This bureaucratic simplicity was oddly comforting. In a world of complex family dynamics and emotional manipulation, there was something refreshing about an institution that operated on clear, objective criteria. The bank didn't care about Emma's dreams, my parents' opinions, or my own conflicted feelings. They cared about consent, documentation, and following established procedures. In the months that followed, I found myself examining every interaction, every relationship, through the lens of this betrayal. I changed my credit card numbers, removed my parents' access to my accounts, and implemented new security measures that felt simultaneously necessary and deeply sad. I had to protect myself from the people who were supposed to protect me. The process of securing my financial information was both practical and symbolic. Each changed password, each removed authorization, each new security protocol represented a small act of self-preservation. I was building walls not just around my money, but around my trust, my vulnerability, my willingness to be hurt by those closest to me. The extended family's reaction was predictably divided. Some sided with Emma, viewing my response as disproportionate and cruel. Others supported my decision, recognizing that boundaries are meaningless without consequences. Holiday gatherings became tense affairs, with conversations carefully steered away from topics that might reopen old wounds. My cousin Rachel, who had always been the family peacemaker, called me 3 weeks after the incident. She had heard the story from multiple sources and wanted to understand my perspective. Our conversation lasted 2 hours and covered everything from childhood memories to adult responsibilities to the changing nature of family relationships in the modern world. "I think you did the right thing," she said finally. "It's just that nobody wants to admit that family can be toxic sometimes. We're all supposed to pretend that blood is thicker than water, that family loyalty trumps everything else. But Emma stole from you. If a friend had done that, nobody would question your response." Wow. Her words were validating, but they also highlighted the double standard that exists around family behavior. Actions that would be unforgivable in any other context are often excused or minimized when they occur within families. The assumption is that family bonds are strong enough to withstand any transgression, that love and loyalty can overcome any violation of trust. But I had learned that this assumption was false. Family bonds, like all relationships, are built on mutual respect and consideration. When those foundations are damaged, the relationships themselves become unstable. Love alone is not enough to maintain healthy connections. It must be supported by trust, respect, and accountability. Emma did eventually pay me back, though it took her 2 years and required several interventions from our parents. The money wasn't really the point anymore, though. The point was the principle, the acknowledgement that what she had done was wrong, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding trust between us. The payment plan was structured carefully, with monthly installments that were significant enough to serve as a reminder of the consequences of her actions, but not so large as to be financially devastating. Emma paid me $250 every month for 20 months, each payment accompanied by a brief note acknowledging the debt and expressing continued remorse. I found myself looking forward to these payments, not because I needed the money, but because they represented Emma's ongoing commitment to making things right. Each payment was a small act of accountability, a recognition that actions have consequences, and that rebuilding trust requires sustained effort over time. I continued to sleep well at night, just as I had said I would in that first angry conversation with my mother. I had stood up for myself, defended my boundaries, and refused to be taken advantage of, even by someone I loved. But I also carried the weight of knowing that my actions had consequences beyond just the financial ones. I had changed the dynamics of my family permanently, and while I believed I had done the right thing, I also understood that there was no going back to the way things were before. The ability to sleep peacefully was, I realized, a form of moral validation. It indicated that my actions aligned with my values, that I could live with the consequences of my decisions because those decisions were grounded in principles that I believed in. This internal consistency was more valuable than family approval or social acceptance. The business continued to grow. I hired 2 new employees, expanded my services, and moved to a larger office space. The financial stability that Emma had threatened became even more robust, but it also became more closely guarded. I learned to trust more carefully, to love more conditionally, to protect myself more thoroughly. The growth of my business during this period was not coincidental. The discipline required to enforce boundaries with my family translated directly into better business practices. I became more selective about clients, more careful about contracts, more rigorous about collecting payments. The skills I had developed in protecting myself from family exploitation served me well in the professional world. My relationship with Emma slowly improved, though it never fully recovered. We developed a new dynamic based on mutual respect rather than unconditional trust. She never asked me for money again, and I never offered it. We spoke regularly, met for coffee occasionally, and maintained the comfortable distance that many adult siblings navigate. The new relationship was different from what we had before, but it was also more honest. The old dynamic had been based on unspoken assumptions and unequal power structures. The new relationship was built on clear boundaries and mutual respect. It was less intimate, perhaps, but it was also more sustainable. Emma's personal growth during this period was remarkable. The consequences of her actions had forced her to confront some uncomfortable truths about herself and her relationship with money, responsibility, and accountability. She enrolled in a financial literacy course, started therapy, and began working on the underlying issues that had led to her impulsive decision. My parents and I also found a new equilibrium. They learned to respect my boundaries, and I learned to forgive their momentary lapse in judgment. We never spoke directly about the incident again, but it lurked in the background of our interactions, a reminder that even the strongest family bonds can be tested by money and perceived fairness. The relationship with my parents evolved into something more adult, more equal. They could no longer see me as the perpetual daughter who could be guilted or manipulated into compliance. I had demonstrated that I was capable of making difficult decisions independently, that I would prioritize my own well-being over family harmony when necessary. This shift in dynamics affected every aspect of our relationship. They began consulting me on financial decisions, treating my business advice with more respect, and acknowledging my expertise in areas where they had previously felt entitled to offer unsolicited guidance. The power balance had shifted, and while this was sometimes uncomfortable, it was also ultimately healthier. The story became a cautionary tale in my circle of friends and colleagues. I found myself telling it, in abbreviated form, to other entrepreneurs and business owners who struggled with similar family dynamics. The lesson was always the same. Boundaries are only as strong as your willingness to enforce them, and sometimes protecting yourself requires making decisions that feel cruel in the moment, but are necessary for long-term respect and relationship health. The response to these conversations was consistently positive. Many people shared their own stories of family financial exploitation, of boundaries crossed and trust violated. There was a sense of validation in knowing that others had faced similar challenges, that the decision to prioritize self-protection over family harmony was not unique or abnormal. These conversations also revealed the gendered nature of family financial expectations. Women in particular were often expected to be more accommodating, more willing to sacrifice their own financial security for the sake of family relationships. The assumption was that women's resources were more communal, more available for redistribution according to family needs. My decision to report the fraud challenged these assumptions. It demonstrated that I valued my own financial security and autonomy above traditional expectations of female sacrifice and accommodation. This was uncomfortable for some people, but it was also necessary for my own long-term well-being. Years later, when Emma got married, I was her maid of honor. In her wedding speech, she thanked me for teaching her about accountability and consequences, though she never mentioned the specific incident that had taught her those lessons. The wedding was beautiful, paid for entirely by Emma and her new husband, and I felt proud of the woman she had become, partly as a result of the hard lessons she had learned during her brief, disastrous trip to Paris. Being chosen as maid of honor was a significant moment in our relationship. It indicated that Emma had not only forgiven me for my role in her Paris humiliation, but had come to appreciate the difficult lesson I had taught her. The speech was particularly meaningful because it acknowledged the growth that had resulted from our conflict without dwelling on the painful details. The wedding itself was a testament to Emma's transformation. She had planned every detail carefully, budgeted responsibly, and paid for everything herself. The woman who had once impulsively stolen $5,000 for a luxury vacation had become someone who saved diligently for her important life events. Her husband, Michael, was a good influence on her. He was financially responsible, emotionally stable, and supportive of her continued growth and development. During the wedding planning process, I watched Emma navigate complex decisions with newfound maturity and consideration for others. She had learned not just about money management, but about respect, communication, and the importance of consent in all relationships. The rain had stopped by the time I finished processing all of this, both on that original Tuesday morning and in the years of reflection that followed. The city below my apartment had continued its relentless pace, indifferent to the small human drama that had unfolded in my living room. But I had learned something important about myself, about my family, and about the sometimes painful necessity of standing up for what you believe is right, even when it costs you more than you initially expected to pay. The metaphor of the rain was significant. Like the storm that had provided the backdrop for my discovery of Emma's theft, the emotional turbulence that followed had eventually passed. But just as rain nourishes growth, the difficult period had ultimately contributed to the development of stronger, healthier relationships based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. I never regretted my decision to report the fraud. I never regretted the consequences that followed. I had acted with integrity, protected my business, and ultimately helped my sister learn a lesson that would serve her well throughout her life. The fact that I was temporarily cast as the villain in the family narrative didn't change the fundamental truth that I had been wronged and had responded appropriately. The absence of regret was perhaps the most significant aspect of the entire experience. In the years that followed, I faced many difficult decisions in both my personal and professional life. The credit card incident had taught me that I could trust my instincts, that I could make hard choices and live with their consequences when those choices aligned with my values. In the end, the incident became a defining moment in my understanding of myself and my values. I learned that I was capable of making difficult decisions under pressure, that I could prioritize my own well-being over family harmony when necessary, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to hold them accountable for their actions, regardless of the immediate emotional cost. This lesson extended far beyond family relationships. In my business, I became more willing to enforce contracts, to terminate relationships with problematic clients, to prioritize my own interests when they conflicted with others' expectations. The skills I had developed in protecting myself from family exploitation served me well in all areas of life. The credit card statement that had started it all was eventually filed away with the rest of my financial records, but its impact rippled through my life for years afterward. It changed how I thought about money, family, trust, and consequences. It taught me that being right and being popular are not the same thing, and that sometimes you have to choose between them. This distinction between being right and being popular became a guiding principle in my life. I learned to value integrity over approval, to prioritize long-term respect over short-term harmony. This was not always easy, but it was necessary for maintaining my sense of self and my personal boundaries. I chose to be right. I chose to protect myself. I chose to enforce my boundaries. And I have never regretted those choices, even when they cost me more than I initially expected to pay. Because in the end, the most important relationship you have is with yourself, and that relationship is built on the foundation of self-respect, which can only be maintained through consistent action that aligns with your values, regardless of external pressure or family expectations. The story of the credit card fraud became part of my personal mythology, a reminder of my own strength and resilience in the face of betrayal. It reminded me that I could trust my instincts, that I could make difficult decisions, and that I could live with the consequences of those decisions. Most importantly, it reminded me that love without boundaries is not really love at all, and that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is to refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior, even when that someone is your own sister. This understanding of love as requiring boundaries was perhaps the most profound insight to emerge from the experience. True love, I learned, is not about unconditional acceptance of harmful behavior. It is about caring enough about someone to hold them accountable for their actions, even when doing so is painful for both parties. Emma's Instagram account still exists, though she posts much less frequently now. Her bio includes a quote about personal growth and accountability, and she occasionally shares thoughtful reflections on her journey toward financial responsibility and emotional maturity. The woman who once stole $5,000 for a first-class ticket to Paris has become someone who saves for her vacations, who asks before she borrows, and who understands that actions have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate moment. The transformation in Emma's social media presence reflected her broader personal growth. Instead of posting impulsive, materialistic content, she began sharing meaningful reflections on responsibility, growth, and the importance of earning rather than taking. Her followers noticed the change, and many commented on her increased maturity and wisdom. Our family gatherings are still sometimes tense, but they are also more honest. We have learned to navigate difficult conversations, to acknowledge past mistakes, and to move forward with greater awareness of each other's boundaries and limitations. The incident that once threatened to destroy our family unity ultimately made us stronger, more resilient, and more capable of handling future challenges with greater wisdom and compassion. The family dynamics that emerged from this crisis were actually healthier than what had existed before. The old system had been based on unspoken assumptions and unequal power structures. The new system was built on explicit boundaries and mutual respect. It was less comfortable, perhaps, but it was also more sustainable and more honest. I still review my credit card statements with the same meticulous attention to detail, but now I do so with the additional knowledge that I am capable of protecting myself when necessary. I still maintain relationships with my family members, but now I do so with clearer boundaries and more realistic expectations. I still love my sister, but now I love her with the full knowledge of what she is capable of, both good and bad. The practice of reviewing financial statements had become more than just a practical exercise. It had become a form of self-care, a way of maintaining awareness of my financial boundaries and protecting myself from future exploitation. The vigilance required was not paranoid or excessive. It was simply realistic about the nature of human relationships and the importance of maintaining clear boundaries. The rain that had drummed against my windows on that Tuesday morning in March has been replaced by countless other weather patterns, other seasons, other moments of crisis and resolution. But the lessons learned during those first few hours of discovery, decision-making, and consequence management have remained constant, influencing every subsequent choice I have made about money, family, and the sometimes difficult balance between compassion and self-protection. The seasonal metaphor was fitting. Just as weather patterns change and evolve, so too do the challenges and opportunities that life presents. But the fundamental skills of recognition, decision-making, and consequence management remain constant. They are the tools that allow us to navigate whatever storms may come. In the end, the credit card incident became a story about much more than financial fraud. It became a story about integrity, accountability, family dynamics, and the complex process of growing up, even when you're already an adult. It became a story about the difference between being loved and being respected, and about the sometimes painful necessity of choosing respect over temporary harmony. This distinction between love and respect was crucial. I had learned that it was possible to be loved without being respected, and that this kind of love was ultimately hollow and unsustainable. True, lasting relationships required both love and respect could only be maintained through consistent enforcement of boundaries and expectations. I am still sleeping well at night, just as I said I would in that first angry conversation with my mother. But now I sleep with the additional peace that comes from knowing that I am capable of protecting myself, that I can make difficult decisions under pressure, and that I can live with the consequences of my actions when those actions align with my values and principles. The peace that comes from living in alignment with one's values is profound and lasting. It is the foundation of true self-respect and the source of genuine confidence. It allows for restful sleep, clear thinking, and the ability to face future challenges with courage and wisdom. The credit card statement that started it all is long gone, shredded and recycled years ago. But its impact continues to shape my understanding of myself, my family, and my place in the world. It reminds me that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with enemies, but with the people we love most, and that sometimes winning those battles requires a kind of courage that is both deeply personal and profoundly necessary. Emma still owes me nothing, financially speaking. But she owes me everything in terms of the respect and trust that were rebuilt through the long, difficult process of accountability and forgiveness. And I owe her the same respect and trust, earned through my willingness to stand up for myself while also remaining open to the possibility of reconciliation and renewed relationship. The reciprocal nature of trust and respect became clearer to me over time. It wasn't enough for Emma to simply acknowledge her mistake and pay me back. She had to demonstrate, through consistent action over months and years, that she understood the gravity of what she had done and was committed to never repeating it. Similarly, I had to demonstrate that I was capable of forgiveness without compromising my boundaries, that I could rebuild trust without abandoning the principles that had guided my initial response. The story continues to evolve, as all family stories do, but its core message remains constant, that boundaries are not walls designed to keep people out, but bridges designed to create healthy, sustainable relationships built on mutual respect and genuine care. The credit card incident taught me how to build those bridges, how to maintain them, and how to defend them when necessary. This understanding of boundaries as bridges rather than walls was revolutionary for me. It reframed the entire concept of self-protection from something negative and defensive to something positive and constructive. Boundaries weren't about excluding people. They were about creating the conditions under which healthy relationships could flourish. And for that lesson, painful as it was to learn, I remain grateful. The gratitude didn't come immediately. For months after the incident, I felt only anger, sadness, and a deep sense of betrayal. But as time passed and I watched the positive changes that emerged from the crisis, I began to appreciate the unexpected gift that Emma's theft had given me. The knowledge that I was capable of protecting myself, even from those I loved most. The years that followed brought new challenges and opportunities for growth. My business continued to expand, eventually requiring a move to a larger office space in the Loop. I hired additional employees, developed new service offerings, and established myself as a respected voice in the Chicago consulting community. The financial discipline that had been so crucial during the credit card crisis served me well as I navigated the complexities of business growth and expansion. During this period of professional development, I often reflected on how the incident with Emma had shaped my approach to business relationships. I became more careful about contracts, more thorough in my due diligence, and more willing to enforce boundaries with clients who tried to take advantage of my services. The skills I had developed in protecting myself from family exploitation translated directly into better business practices. One particular client, a small manufacturing company in the suburbs, reminded me strongly of the dynamics I had experienced with Emma. They consistently asked for additional services beyond the scope of our contract, expecting me to provide them for free because of our relationship. When I began charging for these extras, they expressed shock and disappointment, suggesting that I was being unreasonable and money-focused. The parallels to my family's reaction were striking. Just as my parents had argued that family loyalty should trump financial considerations, this client argued that our professional relationship should supersede contractual obligations. In both cases, the underlying assumption was that my resources and expertise were somehow communal property, available for redistribution according to others' needs and preferences. But I had learned from the Emma incident that this assumption was false and dangerous. I terminated the contract with the manufacturing company, just as I had reported Emma's theft to the airline. The decision was difficult, and it cost me a significant source of revenue, but it was necessary for maintaining my professional integrity and establishing clear boundaries with future clients. The termination of that contract became another defining moment in my professional development. Word spread quickly through the small business community about my willingness to enforce contracts and protect my interests. Some potential clients were deterred by my reputation for being difficult, but others were attracted by my professionalism and clarity about expectations. Over time, I developed a client base that respected my boundaries and valued my expertise. These relationships were more sustainable and more profitable than the exploitative dynamics I had previously tolerated. The lesson from Emma's theft, that boundaries must be enforced to be meaningful, had improved every aspect of my professional life. My personal relationships also evolved during this period. I became more selective about friendships, more careful about the people I chose to invest in emotionally. The experience with Emma had taught me that love and loyalty were not enough to sustain healthy relationships. They had to be accompanied by respect, reciprocity, and consideration for boundaries. I ended several long-term friendships that had been characterized by one-sided giving and taking. These relationships had followed a pattern similar to my family dynamics. I provided support, resources, and emotional labor, while receiving little in return. The friends involved were not malicious, but they had become accustomed to my generosity and had begun to see it as an entitlement rather than a gift. The process of ending these friendships was painful but necessary. Each conversation was an opportunity to practice the skills I had developed during the Emma crisis, clearly communicating my boundaries, explaining my decisions without apologizing for them, and accepting the consequences of prioritizing my own well-being over others' comfort. The friendships that survived this period of boundary setting became stronger and more meaningful. My remaining friends learned to respect my limits and to contribute more equitably to our relationships. The quality of my social connections improved dramatically, even as the quantity decreased. Dating also became more complex after the credit card incident. I found myself more cautious about financial discussions, more observant of potential partners' attitudes toward money and boundaries. The experience with Emma had heightened my awareness of the warning signs of financial exploitation and entitlement. I went on several dates with men who reminded me uncomfortably of my family's reaction to the Emma incident. They would make comments about my obsession with money, suggest that I was too rigid about financial boundaries, or express surprise at my unwillingness to pay for expensive dates and activities. These men were quickly eliminated from consideration. Eventually, I met David, a fellow entrepreneur who understood the importance of financial boundaries and personal accountability. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than romantic intensity. We had several serious conversations about money, debt, and financial expectations before we became exclusive, and we maintained separate bank accounts throughout our relationship. David's response to the Emma story was telling. He listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions about my decision-making process, and ultimately expressed admiration for my courage in standing up to family pressure. His support validated my actions in a way that helped heal some of the lingering wounds from the family conflict. When we eventually moved in together, David insisted on paying his fair share of all expenses. He never asked me to subsidize his lifestyle or to compromise my financial goals for the sake of our relationship. This respect for my autonomy and boundaries was refreshing after years of family members who saw my resources as communal property. Our relationship became a model for how love and respect could coexist with clear boundaries. David's support helped me understand that the dysfunction in my family relationships was not normal or inevitable, that it was possible to love someone deeply while also maintaining healthy limits and expectations. The contrast between David's approach and my family's approach to financial boundaries was stark. David saw my financial success as something to be admired and protected, while my family saw it as something to be shared and redistributed. David respected my right to make decisions about my own resources, while my family felt entitled to influence those decisions based on their own needs and preferences. Emma's recovery from the Paris incident was gradual but impressive. The therapy she had started after returning from France helped her understand the underlying issues that had led to her impulsive decision. She began to recognize patterns of entitlement and poor impulse control that had characterized much of her adult life. The financial literacy course she enrolled in was particularly transformative. For the first time, Emma learned about budgeting, saving, and the true cost of credit card debt. She began to understand how her casual attitude toward money had created a cycle of financial instability that had made her vulnerable to the temptation of easy access to my resources. Emma's transformation was not just about money management. It was about taking responsibility for her own life and decisions. She began to see herself as an adult capable of solving her own problems, rather than a victim of circumstances who needed rescue from family members. The monthly payments she made to me became a form of accountability practice. Each payment was accompanied by a brief note updating me on her financial progress and her continued commitment to personal growth. These notes evolved from simple apologies to thoughtful reflections on responsibility, consequence, and the importance of earning rather than taking. Reading Emma's monthly notes became a source of genuine pride for me. I could see her growing into the person she was capable of becoming, and I felt grateful that my difficult decision had contributed to her positive transformation. The woman who had once stolen $5,000 for a luxury vacation was becoming someone who saved diligently for her goals and respected other people's boundaries. The relationship between Emma and our parents also evolved during this period. They began to see her as an adult who needed to be held accountable for her actions, rather than a child who needed constant rescue and protection. This shift in perspective was difficult for them, but it was ultimately healthier for everyone involved. My parents' marriage was also affected by the credit card incident. The stress of the family conflict had revealed some underlying differences in their approaches to money, parenting, and conflict resolution. They began couples counseling 6 months after the incident and slowly worked through the issues that had contributed to their poor handling of the situation. The counseling helped them understand that their attempts to protect Emma from consequences had actually been harmful to her development. They learned to distinguish between supporting their children and enabling destructive behavior, and they began to apply these insights to other areas of their relationship with both Emma and me. My relationship with my parents improved significantly as they began to understand and respect my perspective on the incident. They never explicitly apologized for their initial reaction, but they began to treat me with greater respect and to acknowledge my expertise in financial matters. They also began to consult me on major financial decisions, recognizing that my cautious approach to money had served me well. The extended family dynamics also shifted over time. The relatives who had initially criticized my response to Emma's theft began to have their own experiences with financial exploitation and boundary violations. Several cousins reached out to me for advice on how to handle family members who were taking advantage of their generosity or success. These conversations were validating and helpful. They confirmed that the issues I had faced with Emma were not unique or unusual, that many families struggled with questions of financial boundaries and accountability. They also provided opportunities for me to share the lessons I had learned and to help others navigate similar challenges. The story of the credit card incident became part of my family's oral history, a cautionary tale that was referenced in various contexts over the years. When younger family members faced financial decisions or boundary challenges, they were often reminded of the lessons learned from Emma's Paris trip and my response to it. This integration of the story into our family narrative was significant. It indicated that the family had accepted the legitimacy of my actions and had learned from the experience. The incident was no longer seen as a moment of family dysfunction, but as a catalyst for positive change and growth. The business implications of the incident continued to unfold over the years. My reputation for clear boundaries and professional integrity attracted a steady stream of high-quality clients who valued these characteristics. I was able to raise my rates significantly because clients understood that they were paying for not just expertise, but also reliability and consistency. The financial security that had been threatened by Emma's theft became stronger than ever. I was able to build substantial savings, invest in my business, and eventually purchase a larger apartment in a better neighborhood. The money that Emma had stolen would have been a small fraction of what I was able to accumulate through disciplined financial management and professional growth. This financial success was not just about accumulating wealth. It was about creating options and security for myself and my future family. The discipline and boundary setting that had been so crucial during the Emma crisis became the foundation for long-term financial stability and independence. The incident also influenced my approach to philanthropy and charitable giving. I became more strategic about donations, more careful about the organizations I supported, and more interested in causes that promoted financial literacy and personal accountability. I established a small scholarship fund for first-generation college students studying business, with a focus on teaching financial responsibility and professional boundaries. The scholarship program became a way of channeling the lessons learned from the Emma incident into positive action. I wanted to help young people develop the skills and knowledge that would protect them from financial exploitation and enable them to build successful careers and stable lives. As I reflect on the incident now, more than 5 years later, I am struck by how much it changed not just my relationships, but my entire understanding of myself and my place in the world. The woman who discovered that fraudulent charge on her credit card statement was different from the woman who eventually emerged from the crisis that followed. The pre-incident Sarah had been generous but naive, trusting but vulnerable, successful but unprotected. The post-incident Sarah was still generous, but strategically so. Still trusting, but more discerning. Still successful, but better defended. The change was not about becoming harder or more cynical, but about becoming wiser and more intentional. The process of transformation was not always comfortable. There were moments of doubt, periods of sadness, and times when I questioned whether I had done the right thing. But the long-term results validated my decisions and confirmed that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior. The incident taught me that courage comes in many forms. It took courage to report Emma's theft, knowing that it would cause her distress and create family conflict. It took courage to maintain my position, despite intense emotional pressure from my parents. It took courage to rebuild relationships on new terms, rather than reverting to old patterns. But perhaps most importantly, it took courage to forgive. Not just Emma, but also my parents and myself. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting or excusing what had happened. It meant choosing to move forward with wisdom rather than bitterness, with boundaries rather than walls, with hope rather than cynicism. The credit card incident became a defining moment in my life, but it was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter characterized by greater self-awareness, stronger boundaries, and healthier relationships. The lessons learned during those difficult months continue to influence my decisions and shape my interactions with others. Emma's wedding, which took place 3 years after the Paris incident, was a celebration not just of her marriage, but of her transformation. The woman who walked down the aisle was confident, responsible, and genuinely happy. She had learned to create her own joy, rather than stealing it from others, to build her own dreams rather than borrowing them from family members. In her wedding speech, Emma spoke about the importance of personal growth and second chances. She thanked our parents for their love and support, and she thanked me for teaching her about accountability and consequences. The speech was gracious and heartfelt, and it represented a level of maturity and self-awareness that would have been impossible before the crisis. My role as maid of honor was symbolic of the rebuilding of trust between us. Emma had chosen to honor me in this way, not in spite of my role in her Paris humiliation, but because of it. She understood that my difficult decision had contributed to her personal growth and had ultimately helped her become the woman she was on her wedding day. The wedding was also an opportunity for the extended family to see how much we had all grown and changed since the incident. The tensions that had once characterized our gatherings had largely dissipated, replaced by a more honest and respectful dynamic. We had learned to navigate difficult conversations and to acknowledge different perspectives without resorting to manipulation or emotional blackmail. As I watched Emma dance with her new husband, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction and gratitude. The difficult decision I had made 5 years earlier had contributed to this moment of joy and celebration. The pain of the crisis had been transformed into growth, healing, and renewed relationship. The story of the credit card incident continues to evolve, as all stories do. New chapters are being written as Emma and Michael build their life together, as my parents navigate their own aging and changing needs, and as I continue to grow my business and build my relationship with David. But the core lessons remain constant: that boundaries are essential for healthy relationships, that accountability is a form of love, and that sometimes the most difficult decisions are also the most necessary ones. The credit card statement that started it all may be long gone, but its impact continues to ripple through my life and the lives of those I love. I am still sleeping well at night, still confident in my decisions, still grateful for the hard lesson that taught me so much about myself and my values. The woman who discovered that fraudulent charge on a rainy Tuesday morning in Chicago has become someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient, and for that transformation, despite all the pain it required, I remain deeply grateful. The rain that drummed against my windows on that March morning has been replaced by countless other weather patterns, other seasons, other moments of crisis and growth. But the lessons learned during those first crucial hours of discovery and decision-making continue to guide me through whatever storms may come. And in that guidance I find not just peace, but the strength to face whatever challenges the future may hold.